Hello, everyone. It's Shane Conto, your Wasteland reviewer, and welcome to the Wasteland Watchlist here on the SPDM Crew Podcasting Network. And this is my weekly show where my guests and I play a little bit of movie roulette and randomly select a movie from my enormous, obscene movie watch list. And it literally can be anything, even something quite disturbing. And that would describe what we are talking about tonight. And joining me is my friend and member of the movie club over on my YouTube channel. It's my buddy Griff. Thank you so much for coming on.
Shane, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And this one's a little bit not either of our cup of tea, but we did it anyway. And that is the beloved 80s horror flick Hellraiser. And to give a little bit of background on this pretty graphic body horror flick here. So this was released September 10th, 1987, has a runtime about 93 minutes. Its budget was $1 million, but made 30. So this certainly made a bunch of money. Based on Clive Barker's own novella, The Hellbound Heart. And Barker wrote and directed the film. Iconic score from Christopher Young, which I think is probably just as famous as maybe the movie is. Barker was disappointed by previous adaptations of his own work, so he decided, I'm going to direct this myself. And then the franchise actually has 9 sequels in
Mm,
total, which I don't know if you have any familiarity with this franchise as a whole, but the only one I had seen before watching this was the reboot that they made on Hulu that came out during COVID. So Christopher Figg was the producer who made it happen. Working title was Sadomasochists from Beyond the Grave. So,
mm.
yep. Well, it describes it. Well, they're not from beyond the grave. They're interdimensional beings, but who's splitting hairs here? Barker did not understand the basics of filmmaking, like the differences of lenses and stuff like that. He was just kind of going for it. They relocated the film to the United States and had to redub the film with a bunch of American actors. Doug Bradley could not see through his black contact lenses playing the, you know, character of what everybody usually calls Pinhead. The
Yeah.
costume and makeup was also very limiting for Bradley physically. He could barely move around the set. The design for the Larmention's box was quite delicate and broke easily. It took 8 hours for them to make a new puzzle box every time they broke one. The first cut went well over, and reshoots were agreed upon to up the budget on certain scenes. So like apparently they really loved the rough cut of the movie, and the producers like, here, have more money, make it more messed up. Um, Reverse motion footage was used in creating Frank's resurrection scene, which I'm sure we'll talk about. That was a pretty legit sequence of practical effects. I don't think this is going to surprise anybody, but the original cut of this movie was given an X rating before they had to cut it down. A nude murder scene and a lodged hammer in somebody's head were both removed from the film so it could actually get an R rating. Frank's death scene had to be cut down as well because that one's pretty grotesque. And we'll talk about that. And more of the eroticism of the film was also cut. So basically, they're like, y'all need to tame this down or you're not getting an R rating for this. So that's all the background I have here. But let's give our little synopsis here according to IMDb, because that's where most people go
Yeah.
for their synopses. A woman discovers the newly resurrected, partially formed body of her brother in law and lover. She starts killing for him to revitalize his body and escape the demonic beings that are pursuing him from after he escaped their underworld. But Griff, what are your general thoughts on Hellraiser?
It was a movie that I was aware of for a long time, but honestly, I had no interest in seeing it. I'm not the biggest horror movie guy, as you know already, Shane, but I was willing to watch it with an open mind. And I think what stood out to me the most was Andrew Robinson playing the protagonist, because for those of you who are really familiar with movies know that he played the main villain in the first Dirty Harry movie, Scorpio, the evil sniper. So it was kind of a breath of fresh air to see him, playing, that fatherly figure who gets unwillingly trapped in that complicated situation, and how it affects, him and his family too.
That's very interesting because I didn't put two and two together that that was the same actor, but now looking him up on IMDb, the Scorpio Killer is one of the first pictures that pops up on his profile.
Right.
This is a film that I can 100% see why this has become such a big hit for horror movie fans, especially those who love body horror and love 80s practical effects, because the practical effects in this are pretty incredible. They put in a lot of effort to, that whole Frank resurrection scene. It's not just like him poofing back into existence, it's his body and his flesh all coming together and repurposing into some kind of human form, except he doesn't have skin. He needs to get that back from, killing people. And, his death towards the end, too, is pretty grotesque when, they just straight up like all of his flesh off again. I'm like, oh my God. And it's pretty wild in terms of what they do with this. And I think obviously like the Cenobites, these entities, these sadomasochistic entities from another dimension are really cool with like the makeup and the costume design.
Mhm.
Obviously a lot of BDSM kinds of things with chains and leather. Pinhead obviously is the most famous of them, which, having all these like pins all covering his face, or and then all the other ones that have all these like grotesque designs and everything for sure. It's a wild ride for sure. And I feel like the thing that stands out the most is they really put in a lot in makeup, costuming, and practical effects to bring this to life.
Yeah, actually, the transformation scene you mentioned, Shane, it kind of reminds me of a movie we talked about not too long ago, An American Werewolf in London.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it was directly influenced by An American Werewolf in London, but I could see a little bit of the similarities in that. And also another thing that struck me too about this movie is, unlike these other horror franchises, Freddy Krueger, Michael Myers,
Mhm.
Jason Voorhees, Pinhead only had maybe what, two or three scenes in the movie. Unlike these other horror villains, that's another thing that stood out to me.
Yeah, that was one of the things because, like, obviously, what are the things most known for Hellraiser are the Cenobites, but like they're not that big a part of the actual story. And also, this film was very interesting from a narrative standpoint because I feel like half the movie is like Frank and trying to get him to regenerate and all of these elements. And you have this very lustful relationship that he has with his sister-in-law, and they obviously have a history. They had these these flashbacks to this affair that they had. And basically for like half this movie, it's this woman trapping men to come to have sex with her in this creepy room for then her real lover who has no skin to come out and just watch her murder them. And I'm like, this is an interesting plot that's going on here. Then halfway through the film, it completely shifts gears to her stepdaughter and Frank's niece, who then kind of becomes the protagonist of the story. That because like she's the actual innocent one, and we can actually like empathize for and connect with. And it's one of those types of things where it's like that character is wholly underdeveloped. Where just like out of nowhere we're supposed to be following her, and then we follow her for the rest of the film. I think the most empathetic character in the film was the father, Larry, played by Andrew Robinson, because we feel for him. We're watching this deceit going on right in front of him. And then I just think it was odd narratively that we shift focus halfway through the film to a very uninteresting, underdeveloped character. And it kind of just feels like they needed like a pure character to get stuck in this situation eventually for us to like sympathize for. And then, it turns into this really creepy haunted house thing towards the end with the Cenobites all doing their thing inside this house. And then I'm like, this is kind of all over the place, to be perfectly honest, from like a storytelling perspective.
Yeah, yeah. And what's interesting too about the Cenobites is that apparently they were supposed to have more dialogue, and then for whatever reason they cut the dialogue and they gave it all to Pinhead, which I guess ultimately worked in the long run because with Pinhead having all the dialogue, you understood who he was, and then the then the eight sequels got made.
Well, yeah, and this was the era to have like a face of horror, whether it's Michael Myers or Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, and then rolling out from that, you got like Leprechaun and all these other ones. So like, kind of made sense that they had like a figurehead of this group to try to like hone in on. And I
Yeah.
think, and it might just be hindsight, but Pinhead certainly had a good enough design that this became the face of the Hellraiser franchise.
Hmm.
Um, but it's creepy. It's unnerving. This film really pushes your buttons. It has an extremely visceral feeling to it. Like Clive Barker just goes all in on this movie and does not pull punches in terms of it obviously very sexual, and there's supposed to be this underlying idea of these people giving into like their sexual deviant natures, and which is why they wind up on the wrong side of these sadomasochistic entities that feed off of our pain and stuff like that. And obviously this probably it's so funny because thematically this makes sense in the 80s where people are like, no, 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 don't be all like sexual and stuff like that. But then you watch the movie and this is pretty grotesque. And I don't think anybody who like aligns with that way of thinking would actually sit and watch this movie because it's
Hmm.
really messed up, demented, and twisted. So I think Clive Barker has a little bit of like, here's the message of the film, but let's have that sex and violence and gore too, and you could have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
like, I'm not surprised. Like, this had a lot of like iconic looking imagery and some really grotesque physical horror, body horror, and practical effects. I'm not surprised this turned into a big franchise, especially when it made 30 times its budget. So, like, obviously, it struck a nerve. I'm not gonna say this is a film that like I'm gonna enjoy going back to. Like, I'm not the hugest horror fan, but there are horror films that I really love. I love Halloween. I love The Shining, The
Yeah.
Thing. I don't think this is like I put this up with like Friday the 13th as in like sure it checks a bunch of boxes for horror fans, but like I don't know how good of an actual film this is versus it's obviously messed up and twisted and will freak people out. So it works on that level. It just story and character wise, it feels really messy and unfocused for sure.
I could only imagine if they actually released, the original version that was supposed to be rated X. I don't know for a fact if there's some kind of unrated director's cut out there, and if there's not now, maybe within the next 10 years, you never know, Shane.
I'm actually unrated director's cut of Hellraiser. Like, obviously that footage existed at some point. Uh, because like they obviously have the footage. I don't I don't know if it exists or not, but I'm sure it'd make a bunch of money if they do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure nowadays it probably wouldn't even be a big deal because, of all the really nasty horror that's been out, for the past 10 or so years, Human Centipede and, Terrifier, and nasty horror like that.
Yeah, after seeing Terrifier 2 and 3, I don't think any horror film from back then can quite get on that kind of level of just straight up demented, to be
Hmm.
perfectly honest. And with things like Hostel
Yeah.
and Saw and um Cannibal Holocaust and stuff like that, I don't think I don't think we're gonna be too shocked by like, and it's really interesting because like it's the same kind of feeling about A Clockwork Orange. I remember seeing that for the first time, and I kind of felt bad thinking like this isn't as bad as I thought it would be. Obviously, there's some really messed up stuff in it, but I'm like, for a movie that's like so notoriously like pushing that X rating kind of thing, I'm like, this isn't as bad. I've seen things in modern times that are significantly worse than this. And
True.
that's all just escalation.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I don't think people would bat an eye if they release the unrated version of this. Because that's the thing, they just slap an unrated tag on it. Doesn't need to be like X or NC-17. It's just unrated.
Right.
And people will buy a special edition of it. So there you go. Now,
Mhm.
Griff, do you have any other thoughts on Hellraiser?
Overall, I was pleasantly surprised with it. I thought it was a very good movie. It definitely exceeded my expectations, and I would recommend it. I probably wouldn't recommend it to people who were getting into horror initially. I'd say
No.
give it some time, maybe watch, some other franchises, and then, as time goes on, then consider watching Hellraiser.
Yeah, start off with some slashers and pulpy horror movies first
Right, exactly. Yeah.
before you get into Hellraiser territory. But yes, this is a visceral, twisted, incredibly well put together horror flick for sure that spawned a giant franchise. And I do have a bunch of the sequels on my watch list, so I'll get around to them eventually.
Yeah,
But
maybe Hellraiser 2 at least.
yeah, but Griff, thank you so much for coming on and, weathering this movie with me.
Yes, thank you, Shane.
And thank all of you for listening. Make sure to like, comment, and share on this episode. What is your favorite horror franchise? Is it Halloween? Is it Nightmare on Elm Street? Is it Scream? Whichever one it is it actually Hellraiser? Make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. The SPM Crew Podcasting Network is ever expanding. We have so many different shows with all different types of interests, especially if you love movies, we have plenty of that. And if you want to join the crew as a guest on, say, this show in particular, or some of our others, or if you have an idea for your own podcast, make sure to reach out to us on our website. And if you like our logo, check out HiFlyer Creative for all your digital marketing needs. But most importantly, thank you as always for tuning in and supporting the Wasteland Watchlist here on the SPM Crew Podcasting Network.